Okay, well, welcome everyone. We'll have people joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Legal webinar. More than a year after the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we're faced with a new reality that whole people work for us. With that realization, we are faced more than ever with the reality that mental health is just as important as physical health. And employees are demanding that their employers support their whole body health. Whether they work on site, whether they work in the office or have a hybrid situation, they're demanding it. So how employers address this demand can create concerns about how to do this within legal constraints. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm Rhoda McVeigh. I'm the Consulting Services Director for KMA Human Resources Consulting. KMA Human Resources Consulting works with successful growing businesses throughout New England. We're your partner for managing and growing your most valuable resource, your people. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. This Lunch and Legal webinar is designed as a conversation. We welcome and encourage your questions, so be sure to go ahead and just put them in the chat or the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll try and get to them throughout, or at least by the end, and answer as many as we can. And also, I wanted to let you know that we have been able to secure 1.0 continuing credits for SHRM credits for tuning into this webinar today. So if you need that information, please email me afterwards at Rhoda, R-H-O-D-A, at KMAHR.com, and I'll provide that information so you can get your credit for participating. So it's my pleasure to welcome Aimee Parsons of Counsel of Olgetree Deakins in Portland, Maine, whose practice focuses on defending employers in state and federal court against discrimination, harassment, retaliation, wrongful termination, trade secret, restricted covenant, and wage and hour claims. She also represents employers in pre-litigation matters before state and federal administrative agencies. Ms. Parsons advises employers regarding workplace policies and procedures and compliance with applicable state and federal labor and employment laws and regulations. Additionally, Aimee also conducts trainings on harassment, retaliation, employee leave issues, and other related employment law topics. So she's very well informed on the topic we'll be discussing today. Thanks so much for being with us, Aimee.
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you to both you and to KMA for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. As a mother of 3 young children and a management side lawyer with a global law firm, this conversation really is near and dear to my heart. I work in an industry that is, plagued by addiction and mental health issues, and we've got a long-standing and solid reputation for ignoring those issues. So like you, like many of your families, the participants, their employees, their families, I've been working to professionally and personally navigate this pandemic as well. And we can switch to slide 1 right now. Thanks, Erin. Never before have we experienced a global cataclysmic event that has really changed everything about how we function and why we do what we do. As much as we hate the pandemic, it really has given us an opportunity to affect real change in how we work. And it is allowing us to start thinking about and taking action on acknowledging and appreciating each other's humanity in a way that has been absent from most of our professional experiences. So I believe this is a really critical conversation that we're having. I think there are many like us having this conversation today and in the weeks and months and year ahead. And I appreciate KMA for welcoming me to talk about this.
Well, thank you, Aimee. And as a little bit more of an overview, what in general are you hearing about as it relates to workplace mental health?
Erin, you can go to slide 3. So generally speaking, we're seeing sort of 4 big issues. I'm hearing a lot about employee attrition. I talk with employees, employers, and my clients, my colleagues' clients on a daily basis, and employers are really, really struggling with attrition. We've had, I think, 19 million employees leave the workforce since April 2021. Employers are watching their employees leave without jobs lined up. We've got more employees leaving their jobs for mental health reasons, including those caused by workplace factors like overwhelming and unsustainable work, boredom, lack of development opportunities and opportunities to advance. We are seeing much higher percentages of tenured employees quitting than we've ever seen. And so for employers to struggle with tenured employees quitting, that's new. That's the pandemic, and that is the product of 2 years of reevaluating people's lives and their work-life balance and commitment to their families. And also, aside from the tenured employees quitting and that increasing rate, we're seeing huge resignation rates among women. And this has really been unprecedented and devastating for a lot of reasons. So we're seeing attrition, and we're seeing a high prevalence of mental health challenges. Mental health challenges are really the norm among employees now, and these are happening across the board at all organizational levels. So this is not something that shift workers are dealing with alone. This is something that leaders and managers and members of the C-suite are struggling with. HR professionals who, traditionally have been women, who we all know have borne the major brunt of the childcare responsibilities and other caregiving responsibilities at home during the pandemic. They have really been, put to the test, and they're exhausted. We are seeing a lot of HR professionals who are suffering from compassion fatigue because they're exhausted themselves, and there has not been a moment to press pause and take a break, because we know that they are often viewed as the caregivers in the company, and we've been in chronic stress mode for 2 years now. We are seeing widespread disclosure of mental health challenges, which is new. More and more employees are beginning to talk about this at work. Some of this is because employers are developing affinity groups and groups that employees can gather and feel a little more comfortable talking about it. But we're also finally seeing some leaders and managers take these first steps in making the change and normalizing and destigmatizing mental health issues, which is allowing employees to feel more comfortable talking about it. Lastly, there are huge DEI implications. Demographics are continuing to play a really strong role in workplace mental health. And it is true that younger workers, caregivers, and historically unrepresented groups are struggling the most. The pandemic's impact on women, primary caregivers, and historically unrepresented groups is more than double the impact on non-caregiving roles. So the DEI implications, I mean sort of DEI in two senses. I mean it in the sense of, the historically unrepresented groups and women, but also in the sense of these hybrid workforces. And we have a lot of people feeling, like there are inclusion issues when you're working from home and some of your coworkers back to the office. So there are implications that employers have never had to deal with in terms of how to have inclusive workforces when half of your folks are at home and the other half are working in the facility. So those are the four main issues that I'm seeing clients struggle with and talk about.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. And when we were discussing this webinar, you mentioned people at work experiencing a variety of mental health challenges, including a type of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that's showing itself in the workplace?
Absolutely. And Erin, you can go on to slide number 5. So there's a whole list of symptoms and experiences that our employees are having right now. Chronic stress is something that we're probably all suffering from as people who've worked through the pandemic. Chronic stress affects our productivity and our functionality in a host of ways, and it's affecting your employees. It impairs language processing and concentration. It is reducing their creativity and their ability to learn. It is limiting our problem-solving abilities, and it's often results in emotional reactivity. So employees who just don't have control over their, routine emotions, that this might be something that they have never struggled with before in their life, but they're struggling with it now based on the chronic stress that they've been working under for the last 2 years. So when someone undergoes a long period of chronic stress, that really can result in a feeling of burnout. The World Health Organization has now classified burnout as an actual syndrome. It's not just a catchy phrase. And burnout is really a state of chronic stress that can lead to physical and emotional exhaustion, cynicism and detachment. and feeling that you're ineffective and not accomplishing anything. So this is certainly something that we're also seeing and that employees are struggling with. A recent Society of Human Resources Management, SHRM study said that 41% of Americans are reporting burnout right now. And this is resulting, both from the volume of work, the perception that we have to be available 24/7 now, and cumulative exhaustion of the pandemic's effect on just about every aspect of our lives. Getting closer to trauma and PTSD, trauma is our body's reflexive response to something that is unfamiliar and not understood. I think we can all understand the pandemic as being a traumatic event in most of our lives. Trauma it's unpredictable and it's unique in each person. And if somebody is exposed to trauma over the long term and isn't able to take the steps to heal that trauma, those effects can accumulate over time. We have employees who've experienced multiple deaths in their families. They've experienced fatalities with coworkers. So there's been an incredible amount of trauma that we've been exposed to over the last 2 years. PTSD is something that I think people in their minds associate PTSD with, people who've been to war and combat veterans. But really, PTSD is just a psychological reaction resulting from exposure to a traumatic event. So for many people, many of our family members and employees, they may have experienced PTSD and may be continuing to experience PTSD as a result of the pandemic. We have, death, isolation, people who were alone in apartments for over a year, these pandemic shutdowns that sort of kept everyone isolated from anyone that you would usually interact with. And that has been a traumatic experience and has led to PTSD, which is, right now it's affecting approximately 3.5% of US adults. Essential workers and healthcare workers are really struggling with this, and women are twice as likely as men to experience PTSD. So this, could involve anxiety, depression, disturbing thoughts and dreams, suicidal ideations, sleeplessness. These are all things that our employees are experiencing, and they're things that people in management and leadership are experiencing.
Really serious, definitely serious. Well, should managers really be on the lookout for these symptoms? Can they proactively address these with employees who appear to be struggling? I mean, how do they approach an employee legally with what they think may be some of these behaviors?
So I'm moving on to slide number 7. And we can move on to slide number 8. But yes, we need to be making sure that you're training managers and supervisors to recognize these symptoms and to understand how to appropriately and legally talk with their employees. A number one thing to focus on is making sure that managers and supervisors are aware of their employees' baselines. They need to be familiar with, what sort of response or activity or personality is, typical of each of the employees that they supervise, so that they can be on the lookout for changes in these baseline behaviors. It's important to pay attention to the duration and the intensity of any symptoms that they might be showing. You don't want to fly off the handle if somebody has one bad day. We all have one bad day. But yes, in some circumstances, it is legal and appropriate and possibly even necessary to approach your employees. What you need to keep in mind, and this is the second most important thing other than observing the baselines, is you cannot diagnose your employees. You have to be careful not to diagnose your employees. Really, we're encouraging a more holistic, company-wide approach, which involves acknowledging the impact that the pandemic has had on all of us. It's not just business as usual. We're not just going to work as usual. It is very critical for leaders to acknowledge the pandemic as a source of trauma in our lives and to model self-care behaviors and set the tone from a top-down, bottom-up approach from leadership. Leaders need to be promoting psychological safety in the workplace by reassuring their employees and their team members that it's okay to share thoughts and ideas without being penalized or stigmatized. Leaders want to check in with their employees. And there are ways that you can approach your employees legally and singularly if that becomes necessary. Generally, that would be, by talking about yourself, giving a tell, normalizing their feelings through your own self-disclosure. I was feeling a ton of anxiety and concern about coming back to the office. I didn't know who was going to be wearing a mask. I didn't know how many people were going to be vaccinated, and that had me really worried. So when you normalize that experience, it often encourages an employee to self-disclose or come forward. If the issue, and I think this might be another question, so I won't get into it, but if the issue is a performance issue, we're going to take a different approach.
Okay.
But definitely, this is a time to over-communicate. Leaders need to be engaging in really regular and open communication with their teams about what is being done to keep them safe. Company-wide emails and discussions at team meetings are also a really good way to encourage employees to come forward and disclose a mental health issue. If an employee does come forward and self-disclose, and I'm moving to slide 9, employers are going to be required to engage in an interactive process. So we need to be training and making sure our supervisors and leaders are, attuned to all those keywords and listening to employees who may be, requesting some kind of help, because this could trigger all sorts of different forms of leave. And also it could trigger your obligation to undergo the interactive process.
Right. So they should get help probably from their HR representative or local person as well, and not just try and handle it on their own, the frontline type managers, that kind of thing.
Right. And the frontline managers need to be obviously well acquainted with their employees' behaviors. But once they see behaviors that seem to be concerning, that's when they need to talk to your HR professional, who obviously is going to have a clear understanding of how to move through an interactive process. And we'll have a better understanding of whether the employee is demonstrating something that, really should prompt the discussion on your part.
Okay. Well, so let's say there is a performance discussion going on. We're seeing slippage and you're not performing at the level we need. And then, something comes up about mental health. What can they safely ask or say so that we're not automatically characterizing them as being disabled? Well,
good question. So a performance discussion is a performance discussion. And I just want to go back to what I mentioned a little earlier, that we cannot be diagnosing. So if you do observe that an employee is having some kind of performance issue, repeated and excessive tardiness, not being engaged during Teams meetings, not hitting certain metrics, kind of having outbursts on Teams meetings. Any of these sort of performance issues that you notice that would have been a reason to address performance before the pandemic are absolutely reasons to address those performance issues now. What you need to do is not ask about a health condition, and you need to not address it unless there is a reason that is job related and consistent with your business necessity. So the reason why you have the conversation has to be, hey, Frank, I've just noticed the last 5 Teams meetings, you've been tuned out. You haven't really been engaged. Your coworkers are picking up the slack. We need to talk about your performance and how we can work on fixing this to get you more engaged in the Teams meetings and to get you working on A, B, and C that you're not doing. So again, we can't diagnose. The entire conversation has to be focused on what's going on at work and the problem that's going on at work. And you can tie anything that you see, any of these observable behaviors, with their work performance. So to say to somebody, hey, you really laid into her during that Teams meeting and that was inappropriate. And, I've seen this a few times in the last month. What's going on and how can we fix that? So that's addressing the behavior and addressing the performance without diagnosing someone as, suffering from any sort of mental health issue. And again, this is another opportunity for you as a manager or leader, or if it's gone to HR, to sort of, again, use the tell, when I'm feeling really anxious, I often have a hard time containing myself on Zoom meetings too. My tone might come out too harsh, but that's because I haven't slept in the last 2 weeks because I'm really worried about, the fact that my kid's school is closed down again with this new variant. So self-disclosing really normalizes what we're all experiencing and encourages the employees to self-disclose if there is a mental health issue behind the performance issue. And this is, again, once your HR professional is dealing with this, they would separate the mental health issue and the performance issue. And so once that employee says, you know what, I just can't deal, like I'm not sleeping, I'm so stressed out about this new variant and I've had to cancel my plans to see my family. I haven't seen them in 2 years. Once the employee starts disclosing those things, then we need to tackle the mental health issue and perhaps go through an interactive process, perhaps talk about leave if they're suggesting that, they have an FMLA. Any sort of mental illness would be obviously covered by FMLA, but it needs to be separated once the employee discloses that there may be a mental health issue behind the performance issue.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's okay to say, help me understand what's going on with you. You don't have to suggest what is going on because that you're asking them an open-ended question.
You should
to get
not
the talk
suggest.
going. Yes. No, do not suggest. Yeah.
We don't want to suggest, but it's absolutely fine to talk about the behavior that you're observing.
Right. Right. And, while we as employers cannot diagnose, we also don't let employees diagnose themselves. You can't self-diagnose. So when it comes to that, we're talking about the interactive process and so forth and accommodations. We know there are all kinds of leaves out there, leaves of absences and so forth that we can talk about, but not every accommodation has to be a leave of absence, right?
Correct. And we can move to slide 10. This doesn't actually list accommodations, but no, not every accommodation is a leave of absence. And really a leave should be sort of the last resort. And we wouldn't get to leave as an accommodation until after an employee has exhausted all of the other leave entitlements that the employee might have in his plate. So, if an employee needs to see a therapist and have intermittent leave under FMLA, we wouldn't need to talk about accommodating leave to go to therapy until after the employee has exhausted, their FMLA entitlement or any additional company benefits, any additional company entitlements to leave. But once you get to, an interactive process and a discussion that involves something that's different from leave, it may be that you've brought everybody back to the office and an employee needs to work from home 3 days a week. So hybrid work or remote work might be an accommodation, again, depending on the nature of what the employee's issue is. The accommodation could be having a separate quiet space in your facility or in your office. There may be, a relaxation room. The accommodations really can run the gamut, and we're seeing a lot of, I need to continue working on a hybrid basis, or I need to have a flexible schedule. I need to be able to, do this pickup or go to this appointment to attend to my mental health or my child's mental health.
Right.
We're seeing that a lot now because we are, particularly for women who I think have borne the brunt for the last 2 years, parents are observing all sorts of socio-emotional and learning loss issues in their children. And, I think we're just, even though kids are generally speaking back to school now, they're just starting to see some of their, again, socio-emotional and learning loss. And that's another reason why employees are asking for accommodations, because there's this whole other list of things now that they're needing to attend to that didn't exist prior to the pandemic, at least not in the way that they exist now. So it is often leave, but it could be a flexible schedule, a remote schedule, a quiet room.
Mhm.
There are lots of different accommodations.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And have you seen the returning to work bringing out more mental health issues with people returning? You spoke a little bit about being afraid about returning to work.
Yes, and I'm looking at slide number 11. There are three main return to work issues that employees are anxious about and feeling stressed about. The safety issues are huge. Employees are genuinely afraid about their safety, particularly those with young children under age 5 at home. I mean, we know the vaccine is available for children over age 5, but people may have unvaccinated children. They may have young children. So they're very worried about the likelihood of exposure at work. They're very worried about what is my employer doing to make sure that I stay physically healthy and I don't bring COVID home to my 2-year-old. They're very worried about what policies are in place related to vaccines or masking or social distancing, and who's going to be enforcing it, and is enforcement going to be effective? And this is, again, a chance for employers to really over communicate everything you're doing to keep your employees safe. Written is not enough. Emails are not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We want to hear it from leaders and managers and human resources, weekly, verbally, having physical check-ins or Zoom check-ins where we interact and remind you of all the steps that we've taken to keep you safe. So we want to over communicate that. And even though it feels detailed and mundane, and HR professionals have been doing this for 2 years, your employees need to keep hearing that they're safe. Employees have life concerns. For 2 years, they've had, or almost 2 years, kids who are at home doing remote learning. I know you and I talked before the webinar today about all the childcare centers that have closed as a result of the pandemic. It is not easy to find somebody to help. I'm a working mom, and I've always had someone who helps me in the afternoons because I've got 3 kids and they've got to go in many different directions. And it's really difficult to find someone to help with that now. Number one, because we're still in a pandemic, and it's scary to trust anyone with your kids.
Yeah.
And number two, because a lot of people have reevaluated what they're doing with their lives, and it's, no longer useful for them to be working at the, after care at the, elementary school because they're not getting paid enough. So these are real life concerns. I mean, we've had lots of physicians retiring and resigning, tons of nurses retiring and resigning. So people have life concerns, like, they may have a difficult time to get in to see a primary care physician or, another physician for something routine. And we've never before been in a place where everybody's dropped out of the workforce and it seems so stressful to get anything done. School closures, again, that relates to childcare. But then there's the social concerns and that is more related to employees who, have been remote for, again, we're getting close to the 2-year mark. And I know that to some it might sound silly, but to a lot of us, when you've been able to sit behind a screen and be on a Teams meeting for this long, it is really anxiety inducing to think about sitting at that table again. We are hearing a lot of genuine concern from our employees that they're concerned about getting dressed and coming to the office and having to interact because they haven't had to do that. And it feels challenging now. And there's this whole new level of engagement that has been on the back burner. And while many employees miss the engagement, it can also feel overwhelming to be back in it with all these other stressors and concerns going on. So it's just really a snowball effect.
Boy, it sure is. No question about it. And have you seen an impact on mental health based on vaccination mandates that some employers have already put in place, even though The other one in terms of the 100+ employers, that's not been enacted yet. Are you seeing any kind of mental health impact with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's significant anxiety and depression that is also related to vaccine mandates. And that is, pretty far ranging. I mean, we have families who have sort of split apart and not speaking to each other because somebody won't get vaccinated. So I guess when I think about the vaccine mandate and what effect has it had on employees, it's, in some respects, it's a personal thing. It might be that, your employee hasn't seen their mother in 2 years and feels that they can't see their mother because one or the other is not getting vaccinated. And this has become such a politically divisive issue that it is causing a lot of depression and anxiety amongst people. In terms of children and what's being discussed about vaccines and school and pooled testing, and we rolled out the 12 and up during the summer, but now our ages 5 through 11 can be vaccinated, and I can tell you a significant number of employees are reporting anxiety associated with that because it affects, whether the kid has to quarantine when there's a case at school or whether the child can continue to go to school. So it feels like this intensely personal decision that families are having to make, that seems like a no-brainer to others. And it's politically divisive. Yeah. And it is stressful. So I think we're actually seeing far fewer employees quitting their jobs from vaccine mandates. Like everybody thought, oh, people are going to quit when we mandate the vaccine. I'm not seeing a lot of that. Right. I'm seeing people quitting their jobs because they're burned out and exhausted, and there's no work-life balance, and the pay hasn't come up, and they've reevaluated everything about, how they spend their time and what they're doing with their lives. So in terms of the vaccine mandate, I think people assumed it was going to be the reason for a lot of resignations, and it certainly has caused some. Mm-hmm. But I think the resignations are more attributable to underpaying employees, historically underpaying employees, and just a reevaluation of priorities and a desire for balance.
Goodness, yeah, for sure. And you've spoken a little bit about this already, but what are you advising your clients about safely and legally supporting mental health and wellness in the workplace?
So we can look at slide number 12, and this is sort of broad-based, but I think up through the beginning of the pandemic, perhaps the first year, there was a lot of, employers encouraging employees to engage in self-care. And we've got to stop that. We have to take the onus off of the employees to go create time where time doesn't exist to engage in self-care. So employers need to stop compartmentalizing mental health as something that is the individual's responsibility to address in a vacuum on their own. We are encouraging employers to take a top-down and bottom-up approach to really facilitate changes in company culture. And this involves leaders being very open and normalizing what it means to struggle with mental health issues. It involves leaders making this an organizational priority because we know that it affects everyone in the organization. So we're encouraging employers to stop relegating, well-being and mental health issues to something that just HR deals with, or just the well-being committee deals with, or, just this women's group deals with. It needs to be the entire organization saying, hey, we are going to make this change. So leaders, managers, all employees need to be trained and need to understand this, but we really need leaders to self-disclose. We need leaders to say, this is important. And I'm moving on to slide 13. The healthy workplace imperatives really that we're talking about are to invest in diversity, quality, and inclusion. And that is, again, both ways. It's investing in all of our diverse members of our workforce. But also, when I say diversity or inclusion, I guess, I mean the fact that we have hybrid workforces now. So we need to build a much more inclusive culture, which could involve routine check-ins or visits or meetings, because our employees at home want to feel like they're part of it too. What we know over and over and over again is that employees want to feel valued. They want to feel acknowledged. They want to feel that their employer is invested in their success too, and that this can't be a transactional relationship anymore. So when we say invest in DEI, I mean at all levels. Employers need to acknowledge what this pandemic has meant for women, for historically underrepresented groups, and make sure that these groups are supported in the workplace, and it has to come from leadership. Employers really need to be creating more sustainable ways to work that allow employees to feel autonomous, that support a work-life balance, and that support flexibility. You and I talked before the webinar too today about, America being unique in its, we live to work sort of culture. And we're really at a precipice here where employees aren't okay with that anymore. And we're seeing it. That's why 19 million people have walked away from their jobs since April 2021. There is rollover, they are going to new employers, but they're going to the employers who are acknowledging them and rewarding them and making real commitments to support flexibility and autonomy. And creating deeper connections kind of goes along with the inclusion sense. It needs to be routinely checking in. And, I have empathy and authenticity in there because it's critical that leaders act with empathy and authenticity. And anybody knows when someone is really listening. And there is a big difference in really listening, taking the time to sort of synthesize and process what someone is telling you, and responding in a meaningful way that shows that you value that person and what he has come to you to talk about. So I think all of these things are ways that employers can work to create healthier workplaces.
Okay. And what about mindfulness? Do you practice mindfulness and meditation yourself?
I'm working on mindfulness. I'm going to slide. Number 14 is just another slide that talks about additional considerations.
Okay.
And it's mental health training and prioritizing well-being, extra paid time off, company-wide mental health days, having human resources managers and leaders who really understand what your EAP program is and are able to convey to employees that, they're going to be confidential. This is not like you're going to see, your boss as the counselor. Do I practice mindfulness? I'm working on it. It's very difficult. And the case for mindfulness really is bringing some genuine, authentic listening skills into the workplace. We have been going. People are not listening. People have not been listening, and we're at a point where we need to listen. I'm looking at slide number 15. The reason why we need to listen is because we do have this opportunity to create some post-traumatic growth or allow for post-traumatic growth. And this is something that everyone benefits from. Employees who feel supported are going to be less likely to experience mental health symptoms. They're going to be more comfortable talking about it at work. Employers are going to see better engagement outcomes, fewer incidences of underperformance and tardies or missed work. We want our employees to be satisfied with their jobs, and we want them to want to stay with their employer because they trust and feel pride in what they do. And slide number 16, this opportunity for post-traumatic growth is really sort of taking what's happened with the pandemic and turning it on its head. We talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, but under the right circumstances, we can really encourage positive psychological change in our workforces. We can take this adversity and we can turn it on its face so that employees feel good about showing up to work because they know they're going to be supported. They know their workplace is a healthy place to be. They know it's okay to have a flexible schedule and need to bring their child, to tutoring or a mental health appointment. Mindfulness, and that's all the way down in slide number 18, is a part of how we get to this post-traumatic growth. Mindfulness is really being present in the moment. The reason why it helps is because it does improve our focus and our ability to concentrate. It allows us to make better informed decisions. It improves our relationships with our coworkers. It helps us to act with empathy and really to exhibit just non-judgmental awareness. Just, I'm here, I'm in the moment, this is what's happening, and this is how we're going to resolve it. Mindfulness helps because it really assists employers or assists employees and employers in not catastrophizing things and not feeling emotional or reactive. But it does involve, all five senses and being present in the moment and sort of, sitting still. I practice this when I come home because it's really tumultuous to be an employment lawyer during a pandemic. And
Sure.
I was having a very difficult time disengaging from work and working with my clients and engaging with my children. And a practice, or my mindfulness practice, was, when I get home, I had to feel everything. I had to touch my house, feeling the counter or the sofa or wherever I am, and breathing in the smell of what my house smells like. Looking around, it was taking 5 minutes to really soak up everything around me and feeling present there so that I could respond to my family and be a good mother and wife and be present in that world as opposed to the other world. And I felt that it made it easier for me to shift back and forth from the professional world into my more caregiving role. And so what we're encouraging, though, is that this is something that does need to happen at work.
Right.
We need employers or leaders, HR professionals, managers, we need them to be able to do this.
And share that they're doing it with others as well, right?
Yes. Mindfulness decreases anxiety. It allows us to have a much clearer focus and to look at the situation at hand and move forward in a non-judgmental and conscientious sort of way. It is summoning up all the grace when someone comes to you with an insurmountable problem at work and you think there is no way that we can fix this in the next 6 hours and this is out of my hands. Well, when you're practicing mindfulness, I do think you get to a place where it feels like much less of a catastrophe and you're able to focus and move through things in a much more balanced and focused way. And this causes everybody around you to feel more calm. And so I do think mindfulness training for leaders is critical right now. The benefits of mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness really can lead to post-traumatic growth as opposed to, workplaces that are just racked with stress and anxiety and employees who don't want to be there.
Well, and I'm sure we have quite a few people that are on this call hearing this today that are thinking, I can't get my leaders' attention with this. They don't think this is anything we should be dealing with. We have a business to run. Let's get down to business. How do they get their leaders to dialogue on this and get their attention and make them realize that this is something they really need to focus on if they want to try and win the war for talent?
I'm jumping all the way back, Erin, to slide number 4. Rhoda, you're right. It is going to be difficult to get leaders engaged when your leadership is not diverse, when you've got, a culture that does not reflect the culture of your actual workforce. It is more challenging when leaders have not experienced what working caregivers have experienced, and they've been working in a vacuum and they're just focused on, this is the job, business as usual. I've got productivity goals. I've got metrics to hit.
Right.
I'm not dealing with mindfulness. The issue is we're seeing the results of not having addressed these problems in our workforces for so many years. 90% of employees looking to change jobs. 70% of US employers are finally recognizing that mental health is a significant issue. 40% of your employees feel hopeless, burned out, and exhausted. 33% of workers are looking for meaningful and fulfilling work because of the pandemic. And 55% of your employees are looking to find a new job in the next 12 months. So my suggestion in working with leadership when leaders seem intractable and unwilling to consider, moving forward in these more progressive ways, is to keep giving them the facts, keep giving them the numbers. Sooner or later, they're going to feel it. If this particular employer is not already struggling with attrition, they will be. So I think continuing to call leadership's attention to what is going on with your workforce, to the extent that they're not struggling with attrition, I think they will. But I think it needs to be sort of a constant reminder of, this is what women and caregivers are dealing with right now. This is why your workforce is not diverse. People are going to look for employers that support DEI initiatives. People are going to look for employers that are supporting work-life balance. People are going to look for employers who are creating more autonomous positions and allowing employees to feel valued, allowing them to feel that they have opportunities for development, allowing them to feel that they're human. I mean, you started our session today by talking that people want to feel like human.
Right.
I think right now people feel like machines.
Yeah. To a great extent, I'm sure you're right about that. I'm sure you're right. You also talked earlier about training managers, frontline managers, and so forth, beyond like mindfulness training for them and so forth. What else might you suggest relative to training and to help them be more empathetic and compassionate, but also still feel like they can hold people accountable to getting things done?
I mean, I think there are, Olgetree, we're a global management side law firm, and we offer all sorts of training that I'm sure, can be found through lots of sources, but it's really, training about inclusion issues. It is just really training about how we talk to each other and take care of our employees, and the fact that we can do that while still meeting productivity goals and hitting our metrics. We can be kind and listen to people and act with grace, and that should be increasing productivity. The whole point of taking this mindfulness approach is that the end result is more satisfied employees who feel happy with their employer and feel more committed to the employer, which should increase production. We know there's like tons of statistics. We know that satisfied employees who feel happy and committed and proud of their work do better work. They just do. And we know that burned out employees feel cynical and detached and ineffective and just kind of miserable. That's the problem. I mean, that's why we need to train our employers about the benefits of mindfulness and empathy, because it creates satisfied employees who do a better job. They're engaged, they're happy to be there participating. So that's why that kind of training is critical. Oops, and now I feel like
I just dropped out for a moment there, so my apologies. Internet. Aimee, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay,
yes.
Good. All right. Okay. technology. It's great when it works, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have about, I'd say a little bit less than 10 minutes left. Do you have any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to put out there for Aimee? Please let us know. We do have one comment here that I think is interesting that says, as an employee assistance professional, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the webinar today. All of this is so true, and what we are seeing every day moving into our second year of the pandemic. I know no one ever thought that we'd be to year 2 of trying to deal with this pandemic, for sure, for
Well,
sure.
EAP has really been an underutilized resource for so many
Yes.
years. I mean, I think it's an underutilized resource. I think people don't understand it. I think employees don't understand it. I mean, there are so many employees who think EAP program means to like go talk to your human resources manager as a counselor.
Right.
I mean, the misconceptions about what those programs afford and the confidentiality, the misconceptions abound. So I think it is time for, you know, leaders and human resources professionals to get much more comfortable with talking about EAP programs and the benefit to employees of EAP programs. You know, I think that, and I just lost my train of thought, but it again had to do with leaders, but leaders need to talk about it. You know, we're seeing the different changes and revisions that employers are making to health benefit plans. You know, some of them are taking out copays for behavioral health visits or reducing copays for behavioral health visits. Obviously, we've seen teledocs skyrocketing,
Right.
and you know, we know employees are utilizing this. So it is a time to really educate yourself on those benefits so that you can effectively communicate it to your employees. And again, normalizing and destigmatizing. Can't say that enough.
And you know, HR professionals are realizing that they need to talk about the EAP all year long, not just at open enrollment time when we're going through our litany of all the benefits you have, Jim, and things you can sign up for. It's a constant educational process to make sure people are aware of these benefits that are going unused, that are out there for them as well. Yeah. And so we're really trying to make that the point as well. Somebody else is also suggesting adult mental health first aid training, which I have not heard of, is a great opportunity for employers and coworkers to know how to get past the awkwardness of mental health challenges. So that's something interesting. Adult mental health first aid training. Have you heard about that, Aimee?
I haven't. I mean, it sounds, and again, that's what you just described about getting people comfortable talking about it. It's all about removing the stigma and normalizing this. And, you know, I would say if there are adult mental health training courses, you need your leaders talking about it. You know, you need your leaders to take an adult mental health training course. And you need your leaders to be able to self-disclose when it's appropriate. And I'm not saying you have to say, I've got, you know, anxiety disorder or I struggle with depression. I mean, if that's accurate, then, and you feel comfortable, great. But it can be as simple as, you know, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety related to this. And, or this is really interfering with my focus and concentration because, you know, I'm stressed out about what I'm going to do when my kids are off of school next week because they've been close contacts.
Yeah, and you know, we also find and try and coach leaders that, you know, it's okay to be vulnerable, and in fact, it makes you more relatable, and your employees more relatable to you if you stress that you are imperfect and you have issues as well. Everyone has issues, and it makes it more relatable for sure. Somebody else commented that they require all of their staff to take the adult mental health class, so it's out there, so that's good to know. And somebody else says, I bet the workplace would be totally different from a mental health perspective if people could bring their animals to work on some structured basis. I wouldn't get any work done at all. Well, actually, I do work from a home office, but if there were all these wonderful animals running around the workplace when I work in the workplace, I probably wouldn't get any work done myself. But I totally agree that animals make a big difference for sure as well. No question. We have a couple of thank yous for this as well, it being a great session today. And also reinforcing the importance of separating performance from mental health issues, as you pointed out earlier, Aimee. That really is, I mean, you don't bunch them together, you got to separate them and approach them that way.
Critical to keep those separate, you know, and if it starts off as a performance discussion and, turns into a mental health discussion, performance needs to take a back seat until you resolve what that employee is struggling with.
Right.
And make sure you get the employee the help that they need, whether it be through your EAP program, or even it could be reporting it to your workers' comp carrier if the employee is experiencing, a mental health related to something that happened at work.
For sure. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Aimee, any closing comments you'd like to make to wrap things up today?
No, I would like to thank you, Rhoda, and thank KMA for this opportunity to talk today. I know it's a silly phrase to say I'm passionate about it, but I really am passionate about
Clearly.
this because,
Clearly you are.
I work in an industry that is, we're people who struggle with anxiety often, and people don't talk about it. And I think that once we can round this corner and get employees and leaders engaged in talking, I think that we are looking at a whole new way of working and functioning and appreciating and acknowledging each other. And I want my kids to have that. I want to create a safer place for them to work. And so I appreciate everybody who's participated today. And I'm really grateful that we had such a great list of participants for this useful discussion.
For sure. And Aimee, I think it's wonderful to see an employment law attorney that understands the human side of things too, because often the employment law attorneys get a bad reputation as being, oh, it's all about the law, and that kind of thing. But you clearly understand the interfacing of humanity with the law and with just people, humans in the workplace. And that's a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for doing this with us today. And again, if you want to get information about the SHRM credit, you can email me at Rhoda, RHODA, at KMAHR.com. And we will be posting this recording. We recorded the session today. We will be posting it on KMAHR.com a little bit later this afternoon. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you, Aimee, and everyone enjoy the rest of the week, and wonderful holidays to everyone out there as well. They'll be here before we know it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, all.
Bye-bye.